Hey YouTube, Kira Qualia here, bringing you all an update to my Eugene Dragon Empire Cardfight Vanguard Overdress deck profile for post-awakening of Chakrabarthi. I literally only have a couple more decks to update from the Awakening of Chakrabarthi set. I believe the last two to do after Eugene are Barrow Magnus and Dragonic Overlord. So we're, like I said, with other videos, reaching the end of the long line of decks, and then hopefully we'll have some other sets coming out soon for D format, including the Record of Ragnarok sets, and also set 5, giving us a bunch of other new decks, including support for the new Blaster Blade, Dragonic Overlord, and Phantom Blaster Dragon. But until then, I wanted to update Eugene. It's always been a favorite of mine since the first set of Genesis of the 5 Greats. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So for the Ride deck, our starter is still the Double Gun of Duststorm Bart. Just the standard when wrote upon if you went second, draw a card. Our grade 1 is Gunning of Duststorm Nigel. When this unit is wrote upon by Cataclysmic Bullet of Duststorm Randor, you soul charge 1. And also for the option of the grade 2, we're running 1 Cataclysmic Bullet of Duststorm Randor. We only run the 1-ofs for each of the copies of the cards in the Ride deck aside from Eugene. So with Randor, when this unit is wrote upon by Heavy Artillery of Duststorm Eugene, you draw a card and choose up to 1 card from your drop zone, put it into your soul. The soul is very important for the entire deck, being able to retire your opponent's cards, but also make use of that soul by calling out other units from it to the field to use. And our main grade 3 is Heavy Artillery of Duststorm Eugene, along with the copy in the Ride deck. We are also running 3 additional copies. The Persona Ride is definitely important because you need those high numbers just to hit against a lot of your opponent's different cards. With Eugene on Vanguard, it has a once per turn, rest 2 rear guards, and choose one of your opponent's rear guards and retire it, and this unit gets plus 10,000 to end of turn. So along with the potential Persona Ride and its own plus 10, you can hit 33k alone without even a boost, and the cards you can rest can at times also be restood thanks to cards like Strong, Fortress Dragon, and just the option of recalling new units with Eugene's own skill. And also, almost forgot, the most important part is the second card skill on Vanguard Circle once per turn. If your opponent's rear guard was retired this turn, Soul Blast 5, look at the same number of cards from the top of your deck as the number of your opponent's open rear guards and choose any number of unit cards from among them, call them to rear, and put the rest in the soul. So at least if you don't want to call out trigger units, they can go into the soul to then repower the same ability that Eugene used the following turn for retiring other cards for the Soul Blast and calling out new ones onto the field. And like I said, the ones you rest can also just be called over with the new units you call from the top of the deck. The biggest weakness would definitely be calling out a bunch of triggers, because then they take away from the potential drive check that Eugene could also have had. For the other grade 3 I run in the deck, I'm just down to 2 Penetrate Dragon Trabosh. It does come in handy when you need that additional critical, but it also helps for the soul buildup. I have the 7 critical lineup for the actual trigger lineup, but still, this pressure that you can use just by calling a Trabosh even to the back row rear guard and then putting into the soul to provide the additional critical will make your opponent want to guard Eugene that much more, because then if you do reveal a critical trigger off Eugene and they no guard that, that's 3 damage right then and there, and the potential 4 of. And if you go for the extra pressure, that could be the game right then and there. And then for the grade 2s from the new support, from set 4, I am running 4 Twin Bullet of Duststorm Travis on rear guard once per turn. If your opponent's rear guard was retired this turn, Counter Blast 1, Soul Blast 1, choose one of your opponent's rear guards, retire it, and this unit gets plus 10,000 to end of turn. So with the Persona Ride and Travis's own skill, it could be 30,000 total power, and it's a once per turn, which I really do like, because then it can remain on the field and just be that once per turn card. The biggest thing you'll use with Eugene is the Soul Blast power. The Counter Blast can be saved for cards like Travis and a couple of our other grade 1 units, but Travis is great for that power and setup, and just the option because you always have the guarantee to retire with Eugene, and then the additional retire thanks to Travis. The other grade 2s I run in the deck, I'm also running 4 I believe it's Howitzer, how you pronounce it, of Duststorm Dustin. When this unit is placed on rear guard, if your Vanguard is Heavy Artillery of Duststorm Eugene, put a card from your hand to your soul, draw a card, choose one of your opponent's grade 2 or greater rear guards, and retire it. More retire power for our grade 2 lineup, and some of the potential cards you can put into the soul, like Twin Strike of Duststorm Orlando, can be called back out onto the field for you to use as a booster or an attacker against your opponent. I like the option with that. I used to run the card that you could retire from the rear guard to then count as the discard for the ride. costs, but I didn't really like it as much. It always came up as sort of a dead draw, or just an option that I could have saved it in my hand and prevented my opponent from either placing it into the prison or retiring themselves for the actual cost for the ride deck. And with it, I just wanted to use more cards that can be used in the soul for buildup. And the other thing about it, it was a +6 and it only got the +5 when it was called on rear guard. And for the last of the grade 2s, I also run 4 Strong Fortress Dragon, Gilbray Brachio. On rearguard, if your Vanguard is Heavy Artillery of Duststorm Eugene. Soul Blast 1, rest this unit, choose one of your opponent's rearguards and retire it. And at the beginning of your battle phase, if your opponent has 1 or less rearguards, you stand this unit, and it gets plus 5,000 to end of turn. So all your grade 2s in the deck can retire an opponent's rearguard. That's what I love about the new lineup altogether. But with Gilbray Brachio, even if you don't use it for its own skill, if it was already on the field, and you just rest 2 of them for Eugene, you can at least then restand them again and have the potential attacks with this card against your opponent, even though they were needed for the cost of Eugene. I sometimes like to use them for the intercept option, but they definitely do come in handy the most, being the restand power and the potential retire if I didn't want to use Eugene's own rest skill, because Eugene definitely does come in handy the most when I use the Soul Blast 5 to call needed rearguards to the field. And that is it for the grade 2s. Moving on now to the grade 1s. I always like to high grade 1 count in the Eugene deck, and I thought I would stick to that for a good majority of it, with some of those cards being the setup like Twin Strike of Duststorm Orlando. From the soul, if your opponent's rearguard was retired this turn, you can counterblast 1 and call this card to rearguard. That's one of the counterblasts I spoke of before, while a lot of the other cards rely on soul blasting for their skills. But this one gives you a booster on the field, which an 8k booster definitely does make a difference between 6k or even the 5k that some of the other grade 1s in the deck use. And on rearguard, when your grade 3 or grade Vanguard attacks, put this unit to your soul, choose one of your Vanguards, and it gets plus 5,000 until end of turn. So even if it goes for the rested potential on the rearguard to retire using Eugene's own skill, it can then be placed into the soul and needed for the additional plus 5 to one of your other rearguards, especially giving the plus 5 additionally with the restand that Gilbray Brachio would provide, making it 20,000 or 30,000 if you Persona Road. And for more retire power, I also run 3 Dragritter Edurus. With this card, if your opponent's rearguard was retired this turn, counterblast 1, and perform one of the following. This unit gets plus 10,000 to end of turn, or put this unit to your soul and choose one of your opponent's grade 2 or greater rearguards and retire it. So it doesn't have to resolve when you retire something else. All this card specifies is if your opponent's rearguard was retired this turn. So you can even call out Edurus later on and still use its own skill for the plus 10 or retiring of another rearguard, because a lot of cards do rely on having your opponent being at 1 or less rearguards, like Gilbray Brachio's restand. And then for the last of the grade 1s, I also just run the 4 Sentinel, which is Twin Buckler Dragon, just the standard go-to Sentinel for the Dragon Empire deck. Since you can really invest your hand in this deck, you want to go on the defensive as much as you can, and saving up that hand cost for guarding your opponent's own attacks will be the biggest way to do it. Saving Eugene for being able to call out your own cards, and then using your hand to guard against your opponent. You really don't want to have to call too much from your hand onto the field using this deck. And then as for the normal order, the only normal order I run in the deck is definitely the best one for Eugene, and that is Best Harvest. I have this card at 3 just because there's the potential that you can reveal this card with Eugene, and then it has to just go into the soul. It can't be something called out. And then you also just wasted the potential of adding it to your hand for a draw and then activate it. Choose one of your Vanguards. Till the end of the turn, it gets on Vanguard Circle when your opponent's rearguard is retired. During your main phase, you draw a card. You'll retire a good number of your opponent's rearguards using Eugene in this deck. So just being able to gain additional draw, even if you were to invest from your hand for the retire, you'll at least be making that card back with your draw thanks to Best Harvest. And Best Harvest will also give you that -1 when you activate it, but you can make that up using the retire of Eugene on the field, which has been on the field the whole time. And that is it for the orders as well. Moving on now to the grade 0s. For our critical lineup, I am running 7 criticals. I thought of running 8. If I were to do so, I'd drop the number of draw triggers that I run in the deck. But 7 critical, along with Burning Flail Dragon, being very, very useful for the soul buildup and plus power to another card on the field, always comes in handy for this deck. That's why it's the majority critical trigger over the Conduct Spark Dragon. And for the draw trigger, I am running 4 of the Flare Veil Dragon. The additional shield option, I liked front triggers for the longest time, but when I found that I was just not hitting the restand potential that I needed and getting enough power off the Persona rides and the card's own skills, I wanted to go for more of a draw option because I was always just short a couple cards for the guard against my opponent. And Flare Veil Dragon having the additional 5k shield, making it a 10k guard, can definitely block a good number of attacks that I wouldn't want to waste a critical or a heal trigger on. With the heals running the White Light Dragon, Pan Solus, I feel like the dinosaur cards are very very fitting for the Eugene deck, giving us that old, Kagero and Tachikaze feel to the trigger lineup. With the overtrigger being Dragveda, it's always a plus when you can restand your Vanguard, and 100 million is just an added bonus, giving you more cards in your hand, but the added pressure that Eugene can provide when you drive check a potential critical trigger on your restands. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed. Like I said, I've been building Eugene since the Genesis, the 5 grade set. We've had 4 sets out, and I'm sure we'll get more support in set 5 to better help support this deck overall with what it was meant to do. Maybe we'll even see a grade 4 Eugene later on down the line. And I definitely would like to see if it has the retire Vanguard potential that a lot of other cards from, Dragon Empire have had in the Cardfight Vanguard series. But until then, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Qualia out.